Hi, today we've got some upgrades to talk about brakes on the Toyota 86. Now we're going to talk about the GTS and the GT model, and of course the Subaru BRZ. And remember, the Subaru BRZ and the Toyota 86 GTS are effectively the same. They've got ventilated brakes on the back with the big calipers on the front. But what you may or may not be aware of is what is the detailed differences between the front and rear brakes between the GT model and the GTS model, and these parts are interchangeable. So what we've got here is a GT model with GTS brakes. Now you'll notice it's got the ventilated rear disc with the replacement caliper, because the caliper has to have a wider gap here for the bigger aperture for the wider disc. Of course, these brakes are available to be upgraded with DBA slotted and or cross-drilled rotors as well. Inside here is the handbrake mechanism. It's important to remember that's where the handbrake mechanism is on a Subaru and on a lot of new modern day cars. Let's go around to the front. And again, larger diameter rotor on the front, ventilated still. The car comes standard ventilated, but it's also, I'll get the camera and come around the other side, it's got a wider modified caliper bracket. Because the rotor is bigger in diameter, it has to space the caliper out further, whereas on the rear, effectively the rotor diameter is the same, except you've got a ventilated rotor on the back instead of a solid rotor. Now, this is where the stuff starts getting a little bit complicated, so it's important that you want to carefully listen about what I'm going to say, because there are some differences between the piston diameter of the GT front brakes, that is the small brakes, compared to the piston diameter. There's a twin piston caliper on the GTS brakes. And I've got all this written down to show you, which we'll discuss in a minute. So this is the caliper bracket that has a different offset between the part that bolts onto the hub and the offset for the caliper slide, because remember, this part here slides on this sliding pin here. And as you can see in here, you have a twin piston design with a fixed caliper which slides to allow for the pistons to come in and out, which apply the pressure for the pad. This is the smaller front original GT rotor. This is the original factory solid rear brake rotor, and this is the original rear caliper for the non-ventilated rear rotor, because you can see, notice how that slot is a lot narrower than the one I showed you a minute ago with the ventilated rear brakes. Now the part that we're going to talk about here, if you want to get a little bit tricky, is on the front of the GT and the GTS, this piston diameter varies. On the GT86, it's got 34mm diameter pistons here, whereas on the GTS, it's got a 32mm diameter piston. You would typically expect, because the GTS has got a larger diameter rotor with more mechanical advantage to stop the car, Subaru and Toyota have gone for a slightly smaller piston diameter to keep the balance of the brakes front and back, remembering that the different diameter brakes. Whereas on the rear calipers, the GTS model has got a 33mm diameter single piston sliding caliper, whereas the GT model, that's the one with the solid rotor, not the ventilated rotor, is actually 32, so it's smaller. So the thing to then consider is, which we've done on this particular car, if you want to change a little bit of the brake bias front to rear, what you can actually do, and we've done this again today, is you take the sliding caliper part off the GTS model, which is designed for the bigger diameter rotor. You get the original caliper off the GT model, which remember has got bigger pistons, combined with the bigger diameter disc, will give you much more front mechanical advantage balanced with the rear GTS rear brakes. If you put the GTS front caliper with the GTS bigger offset caliper bracket to match the bigger diameter disc, you'll then have a little bit more rear brakes, which may suit your driving style a bit differently. Now you got to remember, we're only talking the difference in the front of a piston diameter of 32 versus 34mm, but if you work out the surface area of two pistons, that can have a big effect on the mechanical advantage of the load that the caliper is squeezing those brake pads together. So that's about brake bias. Let's just give you some final dimensions from the disc point of view. The GTS front brake disc diameter is 295, whereas the rear is a 290. The front GT model is a 277mm diameter rotor with a 285mm diameter rotor. So you can see the difference between the front to back, 295 on the front, 290 on the rear for the GTS, 277 on the front versus 285 on the rear for the GT model, and you can start to begin to understand the difference. In this particular car, we've opted to give the customer the most braking efficiency that he can get, so we've fitted the GTS and the GT brackets and the bigger diameter front rotors to change the balance of the car. So there you have it. You'll probably want to watch this video a couple of times to get that all into your head about what you can do with your brakes. But if you want to fiddle with the brake balance a little bit and you've got access to GT and GTS front and rear factory brakes, you can change that with you without having to stuff around with master cylinders or anything else. And of course, remembering these front rotors are available from DBA here in Australia with the slotted design. You can get them in a 4000 or a 5000 series rotor now, because this is obviously a common disc for the Turbo WRX. Hopefully this has helped you no matter where you are in the world with your Subaru and Toyota. Talking about the 86 model, remembering this is the same on the BRZ. The BRZ, remembering, has got the same brakes as the Toyota GTS. I'm Brett Middleton. Thanks for watching.